On behalf of Midas Touch, welcome to this webinar. We believe that some dramatic changes are taking root in B2B sales and that these are impacting the results sales pros have to deliver. Successful salespeople can sometimes be forgiven for thinking that they must continue doing what has made them successful so far, except do more of it when the results don't arrive. But we believe that something needs to change, and we hope that at the end of this webinar, they will agree that something has to change. I am Sanjeev Nambudri, co-founder of Midas Touch. Welcome to this webinar on why we believe B2B sales, at least the way we know it, is dying, and a few thoughts on what can be done to save it. Before we get started, a couple of requests. Please type your questions into the chat window. We'll answer all of them in the end. Second is, I would request all of you to keep yourself on mute for the duration of the webinar so that no ambient noise makes its way into this. That will help the experience be cleaner for everyone. If you are unable to hear me or you are unable to see the screen, please type that into the chat window and I'll make sure to try and fix it. That apart, I am at sanjeev.n@i-midastouch.com. If you think of any questions after the webinar or you are unable to get answers to your questions now, please feel free to drop me a line and I'll make sure that I get back to you. So folks, the premise is B2B sales is dying and what can save it? What we'll try to do is first look at what are the symptoms, why we believe that this statement is valid, what is the evidence behind our belief, what could happen if what we expect to transpire actually does transpire. I'll talk a little bit about myself after that, then present what I believe is a diagnosis and then potentially some cures. And we'll end with a little segment about Midas Touch itself. So first is you typically when you go to a doctor, they will ask you how are you feeling, and you will present what you think is happening to you. So let me ask you that and answer these questions honestly to yourselves. Are you having far fewer conversations these days that you would call early stage than you used to even like 2-3 years ago? Are you talking to fewer new prospects than you ever used to? I mean, are most of your conversations with people you have already spoken to before? As salespeople, do you sometimes or more often than not, do you feel frustrated that you are unable to make the sales progress at the pace that you want them to? And this both ways, in the sense that some sales probably kind of roll along at their own pace, and you feel that kind of this would have happened even if you weren't there. And others that you give a lot of information in the beginning, but it never seems to move beyond that initial evaluation stage. There are a whole bunch of other questions which are related to these. So, are your email campaigns drawing lesser responses than they used to? Are your cold calls not getting you the initial meetings that you need? And are the incoming leads that you used to depend on, are these reducing compared to they were, say, a couple of years or even years ago? So there's some good news and bad news. Uh, and it could potentially be the same news classified as either. The fact is that this is not only you. This is a wide, it's a phenomenon which is across most B2B sales professionals today. And here are some numbers that I'll lean on to kind of support that point. HubSpot says that when you look at the different stages of the buying cycle, when buyers want to engage with vendors, we used to earlier engage with vendors as B2B salespeople very early in the cycle. Now, early in the awareness stage, only 19%, less than 1 in 5 buyer wants to engage with you. 60% want to engage only after they have done their own research and come up with a short list, and less than 20% after they have, and 20% after they have already decided what to buy. The second is that 84% of buyers would start their buying process through a reference from someone. Obviously, all of this means that the influence the salesperson had in the process is reducing. In fact, Gartner reported on a survey that customers rate the interaction with the salesperson as the least influential interaction in the whole buying process. Uh, all this translates into an inability to get in front of new prospects early in the game. And because the traditional methods we used to utilize, like cold calls and email campaigns, are less effective than they used to, 90% of C level executives don't respond at all to cold calls, and less than 0.5%. So cold calls actually generate preliminary appointments. So if you crunch the numbers, if you need to do 4 meetings a month, you will probably need to make about 1,500 phone calls. Email campaigns are no less ineffective these days. Taking just one industry, which is technology, less than 12% of emails get opened, and as it happens, only 6% of the mails that get opened actually generate clicks back to the website. So, what does this translate into? What would this mean? So, the first stat here, which the average sales development representative performs 94 different activities in a day, but HubSpot says that less than 20, but only about 20% of them are actually talking to prospects. So, which means less than 2 hours in a day, they are talking to prospects. Now, in the B2C space, Forrester reports that 93% of buyers say they prefer buying online rather than from salespersons. Now, with the coming in of technologies like AI and customers becoming much more informed than they were earlier, there is a there is a real fear that this kind of numbers could start applying in the B2B space as well. It is already moving in that direction. Surveys of salespeople show that 57% of them believe that buyers are less dependent on salespeople than they were earlier. And obviously, the skills that salespeople need today are different from what they used to be. So, which is why there is a reasonable possibility that over 1 million sales reps will be out of a job by the year 2020. So, at this point, let me just take a pause and there's a lot that I'm saying, but there is uh, a background in sales that I have, which allows me to kind of empathize with what is happening out here. So I have sold software products, software services, chemical and process equipment, other technology services around the world for over 25 years. A lot of that was done in the traditional way, which is knocking on doors, making calls, sending emails, meeting people. But now, over the last 6.5 years, as co-founder of Midas Touch, I have had the opportunity of helping B2B companies leverage digital content and social strategies to become more effective at what they were doing earlier. So, with that background, I hope you will accept that I do have some amount of skin in this game. I do understand a little bit of what is happening. Based on that, here is my view of what I think is changing dramatically in our sales landscape. The first is the very initiation of our sales process, which is cold outreach. The effectiveness of that process is dramatically reducing. We used to do a lot of email campaigns. We have always done a lot of phone calls, which were intended to get us in front of new prospects and get us an opportunity to have an initial conversation with them. As it happens, both of these mechanisms are dramatically dropping in effectiveness. Email open rates, like we saw, are plummeting. Phone calls, at this point in time, there are various statistics out there. One that has been quoted to me quite often is that it takes 18 calls before you are able to actually get a chance to talk to someone. So obviously, this is not a scalable model if you want to kind of keep ramping up your sales. The second, which is very critical, is that the buyer journey today is being traversed without much influence of the B2B sales guy. And I'll touch upon this a little more in the succeeding 2 slides. The third is that there is such a wealth of information out there already in the online world That where earlier as a B2B sales pro, we used to depend on the initial consultative exercise where we would provide and we would understand the client's requirements, what are their pain points, we would try to define solutions for them through a process of sharing information. We were essentially the conduit of information for the sales, for the buyers. That process is being disrupted today because the clients are uber informed themselves. They have a serious amount of information available to them, and we no longer have the opportunity to present ourselves as that conduit of information to drive that whole decision process forward. What has not changed though, and this is obviously not that is not a great thing for us, is that competition is as fierce or more fierce than it was before. The B2B decision is still as complex as it used to be. Multiple stakeholders have roles to play. They all seek different points. They have different pain points which need to be addressed. They have different consideration criteria, and all of that comes together to make the B2B decision making process complex, long, with multiple decision makers and several different items to address if you were to go and make the sale. The need for marketing and sales alignment was ever present, and it is probably even more critical today than it was earlier. So now if we look at the things that we believe have changed in the B2B sales landscape, what is it? Let's focus a little bit on how that impacts the buyer journey. So B2B buying process has not changed, right? What used to happen earlier happens today also, except that maybe there is some difference in the way that the buyer acts. Typically, the buyer journey is first understanding that they have a problem and figuring out that there is a need to solve that problem because it is having some sort of real business impact. The real business impact could be it could be costing them business, it could be costing them efficiency, time, effort to solve a particular problem. It might be making them slow, it might be making them weaker in the face of competition. Essentially, all of these come together to help the buyer reach a conclusion that, okay, something is wrong and I need to fix it. Once that conclusion takes root, then they are committed to making a change, essentially to find a solution for that problem. There could be multiple solutions for that problem, so they will look at possible alternatives. They will try to define what is the how these alternatives differ from each other, what are their pros and cons, what solves their problem better than the other alternatives, do they have to give up to solve that problem, how much will it cost them, what effort will they have to put in, what other changes they will have to make into the ways they are working, and then that allows them to commit to a specific solution. Once they have made that decision that this is the solution we want to go for, there is a process of justifying that decision internally across all stakeholders and getting buy-in from the entire all of the stakeholders are involved in making the decision. Then the actual final solution is chosen, the purchase orders are released, the contracts are signed, the implementation happens. So the buyer journey is still the same, right? There is a discovery phase, there is a consideration phase, and there is a decision phase. In the discovery phase and across leading into the consideration phase, there is an awareness which sets root. Then there is information gathering, evaluation happens, and a selection happens. However, this process is changing today. There is a shifting of the boundary where sales used to take over earlier. The point of their takeover is moving deeper into the funnel than it used to. If you look at we looked at awareness, information gathering, evaluation, and selection. In the early days, when the sales pro was the conduit of information, the sales pro used to take over from marketing after the initial awareness was created. Maybe customer had got some amount, the prospect had got some amount of information gathered, and then the sales pro would be driving the process, kind of helping the customer define the problem in a certain way, drawing up a solution which addresses the problem the way it has been defined, providing the right kind of information to help the prospect justify that this is the right solution. Also, along the way, in more complex situations, drawing up the criteria in such a way that it makes their solution looks better than any competitive approaches, and then helping the solution kind of naturally evolve out of that in favor of their product or their solution. However, today, because the customer has access to so much information without having to depend on the salesperson, the engagement point with sales has moved from where it used to be earlier. You would have seen statistics which say that anywhere from 57 to 67 to somebody says 80% of the buyer's journey is already traversed by the time they start interacting with salespeople from their vendors. Essentially, what it means is that the prospect today is trying to acknowledge for himself that there is a problem, trying to define that problem, trying to find possible alter solutions to that problem, trying to find alternative solutions and comparing them, and drawing up some sort of a short list all by himself before they start interacting with a vendor or uh, with a company. So, given that this is what is the change that is occurring in the B2B sales landscape, what can we do? How can we still make an impact? I suggest five points that you could consider. The first is leveraging content. There is a lot of research out there, all of them saying different things, but something that I like is that CMO Council had reported last year that B2B decision makers consume an average of 5 pieces of content before making a decision. Clearly, these people are out there in the online world looking for information that resonates with them, with the problems that they have, with the impact that those problems are showing on their bottom lines. Therefore, if you have content which answers the questions that they might be searching for, you have a reasonable opportunity to come into their eye line even before they choose to engage with you. And mind you, given the competitive situation, if your content is not appearing in their eye line, it's a reasonable probability that your competitor's content is. And therefore, when the prospect is getting informed online from a particular source, there is a reasonable probability that as the prospect gets further and further into the sales cycle, that they will interact with the source which provided them with that information in the first place. Which is why, if you look at it for last year, the top rated digital marketing technique was content marketing. So the opportunity that you have with content is, there are of course different types of content that you can use to deliver different business objectives. You can use content to establish very clearly what is the value proposition of what you're offering by answering the questions that your prospects and customers are already asking online. When somebody goes to Google and types, how do I solve this problem? If they are finding the content that you have to offer, there is a reasonable probability they will consume it if it resonates with them. So you can tell through content, you can answer questions like, as in the unasked questions, which is, who are you? What do you have to offer? What problems are you solving? How are you doing it better than the alternative the prospect is using today? And you can do this by being non-salesy, unobtrusive, and being a valued source of information. So that's the role of content. The second suggestion is be social. And you've heard a lot about social selling. There are a variety of definitions out there, and all of them are right in their own way. But I choose to focus on three things. One is that use the social landscape to connect with people who could be your target customers. And the connection has to be at a professional level, not too pushy, not too salesy, because that seems to turn people off these days, obviously. You can use the social platforms to engage with your prospects. And engagement again happens at a level which is, engagement has to happen at a level which allows you to build up trust. So you share information, you answer the questions that they are asking on social platforms, you share the content that they are creating, You show an interest in the areas that they are interested in, and build a relationship which over a period of time will allow you to create a warm connection should you have the opportunity to present your offerings, your services, your products to them. This is a long term approach. It obviously is has to be done in a fairly structured manner. It requires patience, it requires intent, and it has to be done as a strategy, not as a campaign. The good news, though, is that if it is done in that way, there is a reasonable probability it will work. Some statistics that I have here, which seem to bear that out, that 72% of salespeople using social selling outperform their sales peers. Also, there is an opportunity to become the salesperson who is using social selling to get ahead of other people. So there is Forbes magazine in an article had reported that 78% of sales people are outsold by sales reps who are using social media, which means other way to look at it is that only 22% of sales reps are actually effectively using social selling. So there is obviously an opportunity to step into that category. And it's good news for teams as well. Like 64% of teams that use social selling hit quota compared to less than half of the teams that don't. The third is and maybe I'll leave the diagram up for a while, but essentially the point I'm making, trying to make through this, is that a lot of what we do in the inside sales, cold calling, email campaigning, marketing, sales, a lot of these activities are well meant, but somehow they tend to form silos of their own. So while the email marketing team is hard at work building a database, sending out mail campaigns, the cold calling team is hammering away at the phones. The marketing team is creating content, and the sales folks are out there talking to people. There is a reasonable opportunity to bring all of these together in a coherent manner, which ensures that the effectiveness of all of them improves. This is what I call an integrated approach to lead generation. So, the example that I have out here is that suppose you are selling to, say, healthcare companies. What you could do is that you could suppose there is a compelling event which is coming up, which would allow you to approach a large number of healthcare companies at the same time with a particular solution that you have. Say, for example, a new technology is being implemented, or a new standard is coming in, or a new government policy is coming in, which would require many of these healthcare companies to make certain changes to the way that they are working. Potentially, what this could mean is that you could kick off two or three streams. The email campaigning team could start building a database of healthcare companies, the typical decision makers in those companies, their contact information, and so on. The marketing team could start building content along the lines of what these healthcare companies need to do to be able to comply with the new government standards that are going to come in. The sales campaigns team could start putting together a product offering or a service offering or a bundle which helps them address these requirements for their healthcare companies. The and the activities could then roll out in. Now obviously once you start calling people, it is there is a far greater likelihood of your being able to convert the call into a meeting if they encounter information about you online which suggests that you have an interest in this area. So if they encounter information on social media, if they encounter content that you have created online, if they encounter information that you have disseminated through the social channels that they typically, say, a LinkedIn group that they are members of, there is a greater probability that when you do roll out your email marketing and your cold calling campaigns, that you'll be able to convert those into meetings which are slightly warmer than they would be if they were otherwise purely cold. So obviously what this means is that it calls for a reasonably tight integration between sales and all of the different areas which go into the pre-sale as well as the marketing area. And that's what I like to call an integrated approach to lead generation. Something that we have traditionally, we believe that as B2B sales pros, we pay attention to is lead nurturing. And my view is this, that over the 25 years or so, if I look back at the initial conversations that I've had, I would say 90% of the first conversation with a prospect ends on the note that, hey, you guys sound good, but I don't have any need right now. And I'm guessing the proportions are similar for most of the folks out there. So, what happens in those cases is that we cannot go back to this prospect every month saying, hey, are you ready to give me business today? Lead nurturing has to be much more sophisticated, it has to be less spammy, and you have to stay in their eye line, yes, but you have to stay in their eye line by building a relationship based on the ability that they have to trust you. Essentially, you have to be useful. And you would be surprised how inefficient lead nurturing is across all of us as B2B salespeople. Marketo, in fact, published a survey which said that 79% of marketing leads don't convert to sales because they are not nurtured. So that means 4 out of 5 people we talk to have sales opportunities, but they don't get converted because we forget to go back to them in the right manner at the right time. So, how do we do that? Answer is again content. Uh, if you are publishing, so I used to have this, I used to work for a company, we used to sell software services, we used to develop a particular type of software product. My guess is that if after the initial conversation, I was able to go back to them every month or every couple of months with some content which resonated with the discussions that we had earlier, there is a far greater probability that many of those initial conversations would have carried over as and when a need arose at the prospect end. And this seems to be borne out by research as well. And demand gen report says that lead nurturing most effective. White papers, nearly 44% of marketers said that white papers were very effective for lead nurturing. Email newsletters about 37%, and webinars like this one about 36% said that they were the most effective tactics for lead nurturing. And you can see why these would apply, right? Because most of these are opportunities for us to present what we think is useful information to our prospects without having to go back to them appearing very needy and trying to force them into taking a decision that they aren't ready to take yet. An aspect which is becoming much more important now than it used to be is personal branding. So, even in the B2B space, we have always said that people buy from other people, right? But it's not a just today, we don't have the opportunity as we did earlier of forming personal relationships, or at least we don't have as much of an opportunity as we did earlier of forming personal relationship with our prospects. What we have to substitute that with is to be seen as an expert, or at least someone that the prospect feels that I can engage with these people, that they are useful, or I can trust them, the information they give me is relevant. And what opportunity that presents is to amplify the reach of the brand that we are serving, which is the product or the service offering that we have, through our social platforms. So, Credible had published a report last year which said that leads that came through employees' social media activities were 7 times as likely to convert as other leads. And the reason for that, of course, is that the spread that people have through their social media channels is much larger than a brand would be able to achieve in the B2B context. In fact, there was a report last year which said that brand messages shared through employee social platforms were 561% more reach. That means nearly 6 times more reach than the message shared by the brand itself. So, just to kind of summarize where we are, the point that I am making is that the B2B sales process has changed. The principal change in that process has been driven by the fact that the buyer has become much better informed and has the capability to educate and inform himself. Therefore, our traditional methods of cold outreach are becoming less effective. And to be more effective, what we are recommending is that the B2B sales pros have to adopt four or five changes in the way that they are, they have been doing their business. Those changes include, if I can just go back, is leverage content, be more social, adopt an integrated approach to lead generation which brings together all of the silos in the market, in the pre-sales, marketing and sales department, nurture your leads, and build a personal brand. So, folks, I know that some of these we have touched at a sort of surface level, and obviously that is because the time that we have diving deeper into each of them is not going to be possible. What we do promise is that we will come back to some of these topics, especially content marketing, the integrated approach to lead generation, and the personal branding. All of these could potentially be reasonably informative webinars of their own. Before I get to questions, let me just quickly run you through a little bit about Midas Touch. We are a 7-year-old agency. We will be 8 years old in June of this year. We have always been a B2B focused social media agency. The kind of client industries that we serve are software products and services, e-learning, training and development, consumer facing internet, manufacturing and industrial, finance and fintech, and some companies in the angel funding space. The team is Radha, my partner and CEO, has about 14 years of experience, including in developing software products, and I myself have a fairly rich sales background. We have experts in the social media space as well as experts in content. Our services offerings cover content marketing, social media marketing, and social selling, a bunch of different activities within the digital space, and personal branding. Yes, specifically, our sweet spot is creating content. We write hundreds of blogs, thought leadership articles, white papers, case studies, and product and services collateral. We help clients put together audio content like webinars and podcasts. We have specific focus on areas like B2B special areas like LinkedIn, including LinkedIn groups. That's it for the presentation. Let me kind of, there's some questions which had come through to us earlier. Let me also see if I can answer some of these given that we have the time. Okay. Okay. So one question that I have, which is I had published a stat which says that 84% of sales start with referrals. So what role can content or digital really play in that? And that's a good question. But the the thought that I have is that it's no longer as easy as it was to get FaceTime with people. Uh, and in the interest of scale, you also need to reach out to a far larger audience than you used to have to reach out to earlier. Given that building an online relationship can be a reasonable proxy, and there is research which says that people will value references from other people that they meet online, even if they don't know them well. So if you are able to use the concepts of personal branding like I spoke, if you are able to build that relationship of trust, then there is a reasonable possibility that you will be able to pick up that referral, even if you aren't face to face, always personally in front of the prospect that you're talking about. So I hope that kind of addresses that question. Essentially, we have to move the relationship of online from the offline world. Okay, so there's a question that does that mean that there is no role for sales pros in the future? Well, if you look at it, all of these activities are early stage activities. There is still a point of handoff from marketing on to sales. And it is then still the role of the competent sales pro to close the deal, to win over competition, to define the value that they are delivering, to prove that their solution is a workable solution. So it's just that the engagement point has shifted, and the context in which that engagement takes place will be different from what it was earlier, but the B2B sales pros would still have a very key role to play. Okay, this is interesting. So I seem to have kind of really played down the role of email and cold calls, because there's a question which says that what would be the continuing role of email marketing and cold calling. So emails have a very key role to play still. If you see in the nurturing cycle, email marketing is still very important. Emails have a great role to play when you're talking about specific occasions, specific events, trying to create that compelling event where you have some solid information to share person to person. Email would still play a very key role. And this could be, I mean, what I mean by person to person is that as a broadcast from one person to a largest database, but still it goes out as a person to person personalized email. I'm less sure of its value as a cold calling, as a kind of cold outreach kind of uh, tool. Given that spam filters have become much more effective, I read some statistics which said that people delete 50% of the emails that they receive without even reading them. Right. So I see less utility in that context. My personal expectation is that phone calling will become lesser and lesser effective. I mean, with more and more people being on mobile, fewer and fewer landlines being around, people being so careful about screening calls, call avoidance techniques. My unfortunately, I don't have great hopes for for cold calling going forward. And again, there might be specific roles that it could play, but as a cold outreach technique to set up the initial conversation, I would not expect it to be very effective. What else? There is okay. This is a question on what tools can we use to do, to adopt the change that we spoke of. Um, I don't want to talk about name tools, but my view is that an interesting thing that is occurring is that there is a combination of tools that are going to come into the picture. Marketing automation plus CRM, LinkedIn plus Sales Navigator. These kind of things are going to become more the norm. Your CRM will drive the automation that you're going to deliver through your marketing automation. Your LinkedIn profile, the things you do on LinkedIn will help you leverage Sales Navigator better. So my view is that while there are plenty of tools out there, it will have to be smart combinations of tools which will help you get ahead. Um, I don't think there are any questions which came in earlier before the. Unless anybody has any questions, you can type them into the comments box. Great. I don't think there are any questions. In any case, if you do have any questions, please feel free to email them to me or to the mail ID from which you got the meeting details. So that's it, folks. Thank you for giving us your valuable time on this Friday afternoon. On our part, we promise that we will follow this with more such events. And to that end, do let us know if there are any specific areas of B2B marketing or B2B sales that you would like us to cover. We encourage you to follow our social handles. We are at Midas Social. I am at SANJEEVNAMBUDIR. Also, do drop by our website. The blog page is very frequently updated with content that you may find useful. And that's it. Thank you for attending, and I'm glad that you could make the time today. Thanks a lot.